Hey everybody, I'm Annie, or Annie's Analytics. You may know me from TikTok or LinkedIn or from here. Today we're going to be talking about a project that I did recently the intention of it was to be a multi-level project to show you what a Tableau dashboard might look like at different data analyst experience levels. So from beginner all the way to experienced user. And in this project I used the same data set and the same color scheme on everything. And so what we're going to talk through is how we go from like kind of a first project to an experience level project and what separates those things. Also, I got this data from the real world fake data set. So this is something Mark Bradburn does it, and it's basically fake data that simulates real world data, and it's easy, it's clean, it's really good for beginner projects. It's one of the top 2 places that I send people for project data that's free, and I just discovered it recently. Finally, this real world fake data is a hashtag, and if you search on Tableau Public, you can find lots of inspiration, lots of really great vizzes, and probably some not as great vizzes, so you can see kind of what people are doing with the exact same data set as yours. There's a bunch of different ones. So let's get started. I would actually like to start on the very first project one. So this is just full screen mode. I have some notes here, but this is just everything I'm going over in the video. So this first project. So let's talk about the levels. What was intended by this first project level is someone who's getting into Tableau, very new, maybe they used Power BI, maybe they didn't, maybe they took a course that showed them a couple things, but this is really like the first project example is really to just illustrate someone who's just testing out the capabilities of Tableau, not really even using it to answer any questions with data. They're really just trying to see like, what happens if I put this here? What happens if I put this here? So that's what this first project level is. So this dashboard here, let me make my face, just move it over here. Yeah, so this dashboard here, a couple of things about like first projects. First of all, it's done, you can't tell from looking at it, but these are all floating containers. They weren't tiled. I talked about it in a guided project that I did recently, but basically you can do tiled containers in Tableau or floating. And these are all floating containers. They've just been dragged onto the dashboard. A kind of categorization I use for first projects that don't have any value add are projects where everything is drag and drop. So in Tableau you have kind of this place where all your columns of data are. They're over on the left here. If you're just dragging them in and then dropping them, you're not creating calculated fields, you're not doing anything crazy with filtering or anything. That's an example of kind of like a very introductory level first project. So this is a date here, which is just the standard way of Tableau doing dates, and it's how you can filter the data. And then there's also some filters that just kind of are applied to the whole dashboard. You can say I only want one reason or another. But again, we're just exploring how to use Tableau. We still see lines on all of our sheets. I kind of debated like whether or not the title I was going to change it. So like by default, the name you have the sheet is what comes in as the title. So like if you see a centered title, that's something that I've like done. I don't know if every first project they center the title, but like if you've taken a course, they've probably showed you how to do some of these things. Like they've showed you how to make these things up here. They're called bands, which stands for big ass number. They probably showed you how to make a band. They probably showed you how to like make a bar chart and a line chart. And so you'll still see an axis on every single one. On this one, I tested out putting a label because I think people will kind of test out using labels and stuff. But the label is not super intuitive because there's not a label for like the whole bar, which is something that you'll commonly see. Also, a big thing that I would say about this is that on this one, this is a good example. A lot of times people will use the measure that they use to color, like to determine the width or the height of the bars as also what is the color. And so there's nothing here intuitive about these bars because all I'm seeing is that the more calls it gets, the darker and green the color is, which to me isn't very helpful or intuitive. It doesn't tell me anything new. It's not a value adding color. Same thing with this one. These colors were actually, I had started doing the more advanced projects and then worked my way down, so these were picked ahead of time. but I just left them because sometimes people will change the colors manually to be something else. Another note about this is that there's a lot of color on this dashboard. So a lot of people at the beginning, you'll notice as I kind of step through, I kind of try and pull color back. And like, just as a note, like, I love color. I love using color. And if it were up to me, all of my dashboards would be just super colorful. I would design in dark mode all the time. Everything would be dark background because I like that. But kind of in the Tableau world, it's much cooler and more professional to like not use as much color and to only use it as an accent because that's a better way to tell a story. And I agree with that. But this dashboard was fun for me to create because I just got to go crazy with like lots of colors. So let's move over into our beginner project over here. So what we're seeing here is a beginner level project. So beginner level projects, what I'm trying to capture with this is somebody who's been using Tableau for maybe a couple weeks, maybe a couple months, most likely an aspiring data analyst. They're someone who's trying to get a job in data right now, or maybe they're just a new Tableau user and they are an analyst or they're in another field. I have the biggest kind of library of things to pull from as aspiring data analysts because I'm a content creator on LinkedIn. I see a lot of people post their portfolio projects. So I kind of understand this level intuitively because I was there a year and a half ago, or less than that even, and I see a lot of projects on LinkedIn. So that's kind of the level. You've been using Tableau, probably taken a course, you've put out multiple dashboards, you're trying to make nice looking portfolio projects, but also you haven't yet gotten a job that's going to give you formal hands-on training. And honestly, I think that even people who do get data analyst jobs, some of them kind of max out at this level, and that's fine. So what we're seeing here is I pulled back the color a little bit. I tried to make it, let me switch it over to actually start here because it's the most similar to the other one. So I pulled back on color a little bit. I decided for this one, I didn't need to use different colors for the different measures. On this one, I decided to, instead of having the bars be colored the same as kind of the height of the bars, I used a different color to represent the different channels. And you'll notice the background does have a color on it here. So we've got these bands, big numbers across the top again, but they're a little bit different. So going from first project to beginner project, when you're trying to make a beginner project in Tableau for your portfolio so that employers can see it, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get it to the point where it's ready to answer business questions. So if you're still learning to use Tableau, that's totally fine. You can be just learning to use Tableau and you can just be like figuring out how to make this kind of chart. What do I do? What happens if this happens? That's totally fine. But if you're trying to put out portfolio pieces that can like show employers that you can use Tableau to answer business questions, which is what they're looking for, what you should be starting to do is thinking not how can I show every single metric that possibly is in this data set, but instead, what would somebody who's looking at this data set need to know? And so I said to myself, if I'm a call center manager, what are the things that I need to know? So one thing that I did is I created a kind of a cutoff. I had a duration field to tell you how long the duration of the call was. And I know that in call centers, if calls run for too long, the center loses money, right? Because like they're paying someone to spend that much time on the phone. And so they have like this too long flag. And so I thought I would create this flag that tells you when you've been going for too long. So that's what this is. And then duration is the same thing. I put those together because they're related. And then sentiment is like how happy people were coming out of their call. About kind of the service that they received, because a call center manager would want to have people be generally happy about the type of service they received. And then this is just the total calls because it's hard to get away from just showing the total calls. Also, notice here I've got a line graph only to show a timeline. So sometimes I'll see beginners use bar graphs, or they'll use things that are like separate, like they might put this as a line graph. But there's no time flow from call center to chatbot, and so that would be misleading. So only the timeline is on lines, and then I've got the other things, which are kind of discrete different things on bars. And I used two different types of bars because I thought it was more interesting than having the same direction facing bars. And this kind of ranks them, right? So we can see that call center has the most. I also sorted here by number of calls. Which in some beginner projects you don't see that, some you do. And then finally, this last visual we've got down here is sentiment, which just shows you about how people felt about the call, as we already talked about. And you'll notice that on this sheet is the only one where I left, leaving an axis. So I thought that the axis was still kind of, there was no good way to get around using an axis on this sheet without, I think, stepping up. So I left the axis on this one. So you can see there was, I don't know, about 4K calls that were very negative and kind of stepping up that way. But on the other charts, instead of using an axis, I put a label on. So now I can see that there's a label, and I think that axes in Tableau are just, they're not very attractive. Like they're kind of an eyesore. And so as much as I can, I try and hide axes. As we go through into higher level projects, you'll see that I'm getting rid of my axes and thinking about how much ink do I have to have on screen? Because as a Tableau consultant, I try and make things as simple as possible and actually have as little ink on screen as possible. Another thing that you'll see here is that these tooltips, when you hover over something and the box pops up, that's called a tooltip. On the first project, I didn't edit any of the tooltips, I just came with like whatever the default was. But here, I centered them and I made sure that instead of having it be like count D of ID as the number of calls, I renamed it to be number of calls. So it's like an actually English readable tooltip. Another thing that you can do on a beginner project or above is you can use the tooltip to give people more information. So maybe we have that it was 6,000 calls, but then after that, in parentheses, italicized, we have what percentage of calls that was, which would be another measure. You could use a table calculation to do that. But yeah, so that's it. Another thing that I think I like to see in beginner projects, you don't necessarily see it in a beginner project, is this is a sheet swapper. Sorry, it's not a sheet swapper. It's a measure switch, which uses a parameter. I'm not going to go into it all, explain you how to do it on this video, but you can Google it and it'll explain to you how to do it. You create a parameter that allows, that's this parameter here, and then it swaps out well, actually, it is a sheet swap. Sorry. So a measure swap is when the same sheet switches out, like you could switch between channel and reason. A sheet swap is when you're actually changing which sheets are shown. So in the other view, in this one, I was showing 2 different sheets, and now in this view, I'm actually showing 1 sheet. And these are all in the same container together, so they can like show and hide strategically without moving around everything else on the dashboard. So that's something that I like to see on beginner projects. I was doing that before I got a job. It didn't take me getting a job to figure out how to do that. Also on here, you'll notice that I added some slightly more intuitive labels. So it's not as helpful for a manager to know how many calls there are kind of per channel or whatever. It's more interesting and helpful for them to know about percentages. So I just used a simple table calculation, was able to show the percentages by reason. Well, let's see, which one's reason, which one's channel? Channel. So for call center, what were the reasons? And then for chatbot, what were the reasons? The last thing that I wanted to show you on here is I have my filters hidden. So again, filters are a thing that can be distracting, they can be busy. Not every end user can handle hidden filters because it depends on their analytical maturity. So it's something to be thoughtful about. But on this one, I think it's pretty clear that that's what this is. If you make a project, you do have to work with your end users on like, what does this button mean to you? Does it mean what I think it means? But here are the filters. You can filter by sentiment, you can filter by date, and you can filter by which location it was at. I'm actually not sure if I did it on this or not. Sometimes. Okay, so another thing that you will see on some beginner projects is that they'll turn on, there's like when you're in desktop in public, there's like a little, like right here, there will be a little filter icon, and you can actually filter the dashboard off of that dimension. So if I clicked on call center, the whole dashboard would filter to call center, but I didn't turn that on for this one. Okay, whew. So let's go on to the intermediate level project. It's funny because I developed them in reverse, but now we're talking through them in this direction. So you can see from the beginner to the intermediate project, definitely a difference going on here. My goal, so let's talk about what intermediate means. Intermediate to me means someone who probably has a job where they use Tableau and they have received training on how to use Tableau for their job. And I use myself like a couple months into my job as my benchmark for like what this level looks like. Action item. So at this level, intermediate. Oh, I need to sneeze. Action item. Okay. Okay. So for this dashboard, I debated whether or not I was going to put a background on it because 3 months into my job, I actually hadn't discovered Figma for backgrounds yet. And I decided to keep it so that it would fit with kind of the flow of like comparing intermediate to experienced. However, I think that a lot of people who are intermediate are not adding dashboard backgrounds to their dashboards. Even for a lot of my dashboards with my projects that I use like actually that are connecting live to databases for clients who are paying me, I won't always put on dashboards. It depends, like if it's an externally facing one that they want to look nice, like if they're embedding it in a newsletter, I'll definitely use a background so we can like these rounded edges and everything. But if it's just something that they're just using internally, especially if it's like updating often and the metrics might change, I don't put a background on because then they have to maintain that in the future, which is more work than it needs to be. So, but I left this one on here. It's almost the same as the next background. I think that intermediate users absolutely can make backgrounds, and they absolutely can integrate it into their dashboards, and especially if they're job searching, if they're trying to make something nice for Tableau Public, they're probably going to put a background on it, especially because Tableau Public is not live data. It's just like spreadsheets and stuff. So anyways, that was a lot about the background, but here it is. So in this one, you'll see that I'm still trying to be thoughtful about color, but I can't always pare it back. So like here, I used quite a bit of color on these bars to show kind of the different things, and we're slicing by channel. So we're seeing the different reasons that customers are calling in, but we're seeing that by channel, and it's kind of like slicing the bars and then kind of showing like how much of it they made up. So in general, I think that what you should see from the beginner to the intermediate dashboard is we now have kind of visually chunked information apart from each other so that it's like you can digest one piece of information at a time. Like I put all of this sentiment in one container together, whereas like how busy it is in like a different container. Also, you'll see that just kind of the techniques that I'm using on the dashboard are definitely a little more complicated. So here we've got these bar in bar. I kind of really like the way that this turned out. We've got, by volume how people feel about our service, but then this average sentiment is reflected right here. We've still got legends on the dashboard to show the different colors. There's a lot of colors on here. I'd say that this chart here, if it's like a regularly updating dashboard, could be useful because you could see there might be a week that like things get busy, but right now this chart isn't actually telling us anything. I don't think this is going to work, but because Tableau Public, I think it finds it to be too labor intensive. Yeah, it paused it paused doing this on Tableau Public because it was like too much information on the dashboard. But in desktop, if you click on these pies, they'll actually filter the rest of the dashboard. So if you click on payments, it'll filter the rest of the dashboard by payments. If you click on service outage, it'll filter the rest of the dashboard by that. I don't personally, you'll hear a lot of debate in the analytics world about donuts and pie charts, and so many people like hate them and think they should never be used. However, I think that using them as small multiples where you're actually just showing one thing at a time up to 3 or 4, no more than that, what percentage of total just that one item makes up, I actually really like that. And I actually really like using that as a visual filter of the dashboard, so you get information from it. It serves as a band, but it also filters the dashboard. And you'll find that I took the filters and hid them in a different way over here, so that it just kind of hid them behind an icon. I use the Noun project to like download them, and I use Figma to edit them and take the, crop them and everything. So some critiques that I have about this dashboard is that I haven't turned off all the lines. So here are some drop lines that I personally would just turn off. I turn off this. You'll see here I haven't turned these lines off. So that's just a little critique. But also this duration limit here really only, it does refer to this. I would personally like to see this band just down here with this information because like in context. And then we can take this duration limit and we can also put it down here with this because like I just don't think it's super intuitive to have a slicer, filter that affects this here. What happens is, what this does is I can like say, okay, the top duration here is 30 minutes. And then you can see how it changes the lines on the bottom. But yeah, I personally would bring it down here. Like I said, this isn't super intuitive. There's a lot of colors going on. Because we can filter the date to like this week, I would much rather see just this week be like the only bold color and the other ones like fade to the background, which we'll see. Yeah, but in general, there's much more analytical flow from this dashboard than there was from the last one. Like we're going from the broad here, we're keeping sentiment together, and I think that this would just be overwhelming to be anywhere else on the dashboard because it's just so long. And then because these are in the same container, what I would really like to see is for this to directly feed into this. Like you've asked a question here, you've got an answer, it gives you another question, but that's not the case. It's just another place that I put something. So that was the intermediate one. Now we're going to get into the experienced dashboard, which has a lot of things going on, and it took me like a week to make, or something, like a lot. I don't mean like a week like casually. Like I spent a long time working on this because it's not got just one dashboard and it's loading. It's actually got two. So my thought here, I actually started here, and I wanted to take this really big step back and say, like I said, if I was a manager at a call center, what would I want to know? And because I'm pulling in multiple locations here, I found that I actually thought about doing like just one location and kind of like having an up to the moment style dashboard, but I found that the data didn't really support that. And so instead I said, okay, what if we had the ability to compare two locations? So we can look at just one location at a time, or we can compare two locations. So this is the one location version of it, and you'll see I took the colors bottom down. So these are just like varying shades of the same blue that we're seeing over here. This is the same blue that's used on this, the same blue that's used here, the same blue that's used here. These blues match up with what we're seeing down here. They also come through here, and then this red is like the color that's like my highlight color that I've chosen for this dashboard. And also we've got a couple of interesting switches going on. So this allows us to switch between, if we're looking at like the reason for the calls or the channel of the calls. And again, these donuts, and actually this one here, my friend Caesar suggested this. I didn't initially have a band for total calls on this view, but it's like hard to get away from having like the total. And so he suggested just putting it into the title. So this actually isn't the title of a worksheet, it's a separate sheet that I'm using as a title. So this is the one view, and this is the comparing two locations view. And you'll see that I have the option to do all, or we can bring it down to one location compared to the other. And so what we're seeing on this dashboard is I've picked my primary color of this blue color, and then, which is actually the Tableau public blue, And then we're seeing the secondary color of this red. And that always, every time you see it, it's going to designate, I'm comparing the second location here with this. So these pies are actually like, they're overlapping map layers, like a sunburst. There's been a workout Wednesday on that recently, if you're curious how to make these. So this is comparing location 2 to location 1. We've got right here, actually in the bands, comparing location 2 to location 1. And then if you hover over, like I said earlier, those percentages. So we've got, oh, actually, it looks like I made an error here because you can see the number of calls, and then you've got a number, and then you've got a percentage. So I'm going to have to update that to the first location there to be the number of calls. And then here, number of calls, number of calls. And so in this one, I actually did it by rank. Like I ranked the days of the week, because if you look at what type of chart this is, which days of the week are busiest. So what we're saying is we're ranking which day of the week, like where in the rank of days of the week that it is. So again, like I said earlier, I'm using the tooltips to provide extra information. I also, sometimes I have clients that have a really hard time with unequalized bars, because what they're saying here, they're like, oh my gosh, location 1 has a lot more calls that are an alert than location 2. But if you equalize it, you can see that by percentage, actually location 2 looks like it has a little bit more. Yeah, it does have a little bit more. So this is a trick that I use with some of my clients sometimes. I equalize the bars, and then I give them the chance to not equalize them, because this view shows you that location 1 had more calls, but then the other point of this visualization is that location 2 actually had slightly more long duration calls. And then this kind of flow keeps going, and then we're seeing, I think I had a title on this and I accidentally got rid of it, so I should look at that again. Or maybe I just put it into the tooltip. Yeah, I just published this today. So here I should specify that this chart is only showing long duration calls. And so overwhelmingly long duration calls are for billing question, which is a little misleading because the most calls overall are for billing question anyways. If I can look, let's switch back over to the pies to show you that. Yeah, billing question is overwhelmingly the amount anyways. But it's still giving you some context into like, okay, I've seen that there's how many flag duration calls there are, comparing by location, and then what's the reason of them comparing by location. So you can see that actually location 2, which is Chicago, Illinois, had kind of by percentage less flag duration calls than Los Angeles. What you'll also notice is that I have tried my best to get rid of all color legends because I don't think they're nice looking. So you'll see there's color and color, which is getting rid of the need for having a color legend. And then of course I've also got information in the tooltips to help with this. So yeah, and then the last thing that I want to show you is that I put this overlay, I made it in Figma, which can give your end user kind of a tour around the dashboard, because as a consultant I often make dashboards and then hand them off to people. They might have a new person come on board, and so this just kind of gives you like a really quick reference of like what's going on the dashboard. And if we switch to the other view, I've got one on there as well. So in general, this experience dashboard, if you take nothing else out of this video, what I want to highlight is that going from first project all the way up to experience, what I hope you can see is this inclusion of this concept of so what. So initially, in the first project, you're just using Tableau. And then in the beginner project, you're often just showing an overview of the data. You're asking questions of it. But most of the time, most people are just kind of showing all the things that the data could possibly show. And what that does is it means that the end user is the one that has to dig for those insights. They have to think and draw the insights. Instead, more experienced Tableau users, what they learn to do is to front load that, do that work for them. And so I said, so what? After they use my dashboard, what is the purpose of every single sheet, every single container on this dashboard? And after they use it, what action is it going to inspire? What are they going to do next? And so instead of just showing you how many calls there are per reason, I'm allowing you to compare them to each other or see how many are flagged duration calls. And so by doing this, it's kind of incorporating this idea of a so what. Like here, we're, you know, like this is useful information to see how many by duration, especially if like one day all of a sudden in this time span, one day all of a sudden you start to see a lot more blue bars. It's like, okay, what's happening that the calls are suddenly running longer? Was there like a new product update that people didn't like, or is the website crashing and it's taking longer to fix it? Yeah, and on this one, I think I forgot to say I put the other weeks into the background and then did an average. No, this is, so this one, yeah, okay, another thing that I need to look at. This one here, this is the weekly count, and then this is the average, but the average shouldn't be way above the weekly count. So I need to investigate why those two aren't equal. I imagine it has something to do with the location 1, location 2 thing, but I'll look into it. So anyways, there's a lot more flow, and the last kind of piece of all of this, as you can probably tell, I'm doing this all in one take, and I'm just kind of talking through it. And so I'm just talking about what I see as I see it. I don't have like notes written down. So there's this flow, analytical flow to the dashboard. And so something that I'll see sometimes is people who are newer, where they'll have these like templates that they work off of, or they'll just kind of like throw sheets onto a dashboard, and there's no rhyme or reason to why they put things in one place or the other. So in general, I like to have kind of a flow from top to bottom and from left to right. So your filters should always be at the top or on the left of your dashboard. They should never be at the right, and they should never be at the bottom, because you never want to be interacting with a filter over here on the right and then coming back to view the information on the left. That doesn't make any sense, because we read from left to right. So it wouldn't make sense to see the information, then interact with the filter, then come back to it. Also, like in granularity. So most dashboards follow a top-down type of format, so the most contextual information is top and left, and then it kind of goes along into more specific and detailed information. One alternative to that is a bottom-up dashboard, but those have to be very intentional. Usually that's like a chart or a very detailed visualization that then just kind of flows upwards to show just, you know, in context of the whole organization, where does this information that you're looking at sit? But the point of that dashboard is always on that granular stuff, because it's up here. So it still has a flow, but usually it's the other direction. It's more contextual into more detailed. Like how I said, you know, this is what I was going for on the other dashboard that I need to put the label on. We've got the long calls, and then immediately right into what were the long calls about. There's clear analytical flow there. So I hope you've enjoyed this. This is my project, and I just published a beginner guided project and a first project guided project if you're just getting started. I also think I'd like to do some videos that go over some of my like old projects that I've done to give feedback on them. And so I've got more stuff like this coming in the future. So if you'd like, you can stay tuned. But I don't really like those YouTubers who are like and subscribe. You know, like I kind of find that annoying. I don't do that on my TikTok either. So I'm not going to tell you to do that. But anyways, that's what's coming. Thanks for tuning in. So what we're seeing here is my experience level Tableau dashboard project, but before we get started, I just wanted to say a couple of things. So first of all, this is my Tableau public portfolio. Any video that you see on here, you're also going to be able to find the accompanying workbook on my Tableau public, and these workbooks are downloadable if you want to see how I did what I did. This is a record of all the public things that I've done in Tableau. This here was the last thing I had posted when I got my job, so if you're curious to see kind of how it changed before getting into Tableau consulting and after getting into it, / data analytics, this is your benchmark right here. Also,